we sometimes have trouble figuring out when is the appropriate time to laugh. When an actress or an actor is very good in a comedy, we say, oh, they have such good comedic timing. Timing is everything when you tell a joke. If you rush the punchline, nobody listens. If you can't enunciate, nobody understands it, and so they're puzzled. So if people are trying to figure out what you're saying, they won't laugh. It's not funny. You have to figure out the timing of things. And sometimes we're left wondering, oh, is this where I'm supposed to laugh? Is this the time? And sometimes we take it to extremes even. And so usually at memorial services and funerals, I usually start by trying to help people understand that it's okay to cry, but it's also okay to laugh. Because there's something that happens when we laugh that creates a bond with us. It breaks down our barriers, but it's also sort of healing to know that there's something out there that is worth laughing at. And so for centuries, the Sunday after Easter has been known as Bright Sunday, and it has celebrated the joke God played on death, that even death could not get the last word on God, that God still had a punchline yet to come. And so when we laugh, we are defying the evil in the world. When we laugh, that belly laugh, that laugh of surprise, we are saying that the things that are dark in this world, the bad news of this world, is not so bad and so dark that the good doesn't have more power. There is a power to laughter. Never be afraid to claim it. And so, I have a few offerings. And this is a report of the search committee. They couldn't be here to give this report to you. They are visiting in a neutral pulpit and listening to a candidate, but they wanted to give this report to you. It says, we have investigated a number of candidates for this ministry, but we regret to report that none seems suitable. Here are the comments we have on those we have considered thus far. Noah has 120 years of preaching experience, but not a single convert. Moses stutters, also loses temper, can be very violent. Abraham does not deal well with conflict, flees to Egypt in hard times, known to lie when in trouble. David, immoral, might be considered for minister of music if he had not fallen. Thank you for that. Solomon, a reputation for wisdom, but does not practice what he preaches. Elijah has unclean lips, admitted it in a worship service. Jeremiah is too emotional. He cries a lot. He's an alarmist and a pain in the neck, some say. John the Baptizer is popular, but lacks in tact and dresses like a hippie. Considering his diet, would not be happy at our church suppers. Peter actually denied he knew Christ, could not lead evangelism committee. Priscilla, more gifted half of a clergy couple, potential for conflict. Paul, preaches well but contemptible appearance. Long sermons put people to sleep. Mary of Magdala, church not ready for a woman, exorcised of 7 demons. But what about PMS? Jesus offends large segments of audience when he preaches. Very controversial. He even offended the PNC. Judas, practical, leadership abilities, served on an executive committee, good with money, cares for the poor. We were ready to make him our choice when he suddenly died. You never know about some people. And one more about the PNC. Maybe you've heard this story about, a ridiculous story about a nominating committee. They chose a candidate for a pastor, and when the committee brought their nomination back to the church for approval, everyone but one in the congregation confirmed the selection. The one member who voted no had no real objection to the pastor, but he had always enjoyed fishing and he just knew that with this pastor, he would not enjoy fishing. As soon as this new pastor was installed, this gentleman invited the new pastor to go fishing with him. On the first try, the pastor left the fishing gear in the car and didn't realize this until the boat was 50 feet out in the middle of the pond. So the man offered to let the pastor use one of his poles, which promptly got tangled in the brush and broke the line. The man offered again to row back to get the pastor's gear, but the pastor insisted that he had been troubled enough. So the pastor stepped out of the boat and started walking across the water. At this point, the man thought to himself, that figures. The new pastor can't even swim. Be careful with your new pastor. Not everybody is perfect. Sometimes we are results-oriented in our faith, and sometimes we take ourselves a little too seriously, which is why I think Holy Humor Sunday is important, because I really do think the church can be so serious, and there are serious moments, and they deserve to be serious. But sometimes you need to let your hair down just a little. We can't be so rewards-oriented that we forget the big picture. There once was a preacher who died and went to heaven, and he noticed that a New York cab driver had been given a higher place than he had. I don't understand, he complained to St. Peter. I devoted my entire life to my congregation. St. Peter explained, our policy is to reward results. Now, what happened, Reverend, whenever you gave a sermon? The minister admitted that some of the congregation fell asleep. Exactly, said St. Peter. And when people rode in this man's taxi, they not only stayed awake, they prayed. Sometimes we get really down on people that ask questions. Be careful when you name your children, is one caution I would give people. Because I love the story of Thomas doubting. And I think we don't let ourselves doubt enough in our faith. Sometimes we're afraid to ask the questions, mostly because we're afraid the answer will be too hard. So those doubts that we have, we kind of shove them to the corners of our hearts and we say, just be quiet, not important. You don't want to be doubting Thomas. But those questions can be really important. Thomas was really important. Do you know, Thomas had the guts to say what he needed for his faith to grow. He said, no, I need to see his hands. I need to feel his side. And sometimes I wonder if maybe Jesus just understood that everybody learns a little differently. And so some people are very tactile and they need to be able to see and feel and know the truth for themselves. I don't think we should shame Thomas. I think Jesus' response was not condemning, but laughing. Like, well, if this is what you need, this is what I will give you. But he also says a blessing that I think is probably John's commentary at the end. Blessed are those who see who do not believe. Who see who weren't there. What was the last verse? Blessed are those who did not see, but yet believe. There's the words. I knew they'd get in the right order eventually. And I think John put that in there for us, because we can't see. And I think Jesus knew there would come a time when we would not physically be able to see the resurrected Jesus, and yet we would have doubts, and yet we would have questions. And so he wanted to say a blessing to us, that even when we struggle with our faith, there is blessing in belief and faith. But you do have to be careful about naming your children, because you know my third, because he's not here, I can say this. He's 1/6 of my family, but he's 50% of the personality, and he never stops asking questions. And so every once in a while, now when I have to preach Thomas, I'm like, oh, again with the questions. Sometimes we've had enough of questions, but sometimes we need to just keep asking them and asking them and asking them until we get an answer. And that's okay too. Sometimes we have different responses to doubt. Sometimes we pressure other people out of our own anxiety. And so when we don't have the answers, we tend to act like we have the answers. And so we kind of have this bluster. And so when people voice their faith enthusiastically, or when they loudly grapple with their questions that we even have, sometimes we push those questions of faith to the side and we try to give them pat answers and say, oh, well, there's a reason for everything. And we know the answers. It's because those doubts make us feel uncomfortable. And we're trying to make the situation comfortable. But sometimes we have to let people be uncomfortable so that they can keep growing. I really think this is what Jesus did with Thomas. Jesus allows Thomas to see and touch and believe. So a question that I have for you is, do you allow the people around you to voice their questions without feeling like you have to give them the answer? This is a lot of times a source of conflict between husband and wife. Because not all women are like this, but a lot of women, when they are venting and they are having a problem, they don't need to be told the answers. They just need to be heard. This is a hard thing because men, God bless you for this, you are fixers. And so you want to make it better. You don't like seeing other people in pain. And so you want to just give us the answers. And sometimes we just need to be heard. I think it's the way with God too sometimes. You can give God your questions and then just wait. And maybe you'll get an answer, maybe you won't. But sometimes it's the asking that's more important. Christian education, for that reason, is very important. And so our teachers are very important because they do those questionings. There was a temporary Sunday school teacher who was struggling to open a combination lock on the supply cabinet. He had been told the combination, but he just couldn't quite remember it. Frustrated, he went to the pastor's study and asked for help. And the pastor said, okay, don't worry about it. Came into the room and began to turn the dial. And after the first two numbers, she paused and she stared blankly for a moment. And finally, she looked serenely heavenward and her lips moved silently. And then she looked back at the lock and quickly she turned to the final number. And she opened the lock. The supply teacher was amazed. I'm in awe at your faith, Pastor. She said, it's nothing, really. The number is on a piece of tape at the top of the ceiling. Sometimes we think pastors have all the answers. Sometimes we just know where to look for the answers. And then we find them together. This is the other reason that Thomas is really important. Thomas asks those questions in community. He doesn't whisper them in secret. He boldly tells all of his brothers in faith, no, I'm sorry, you all got to see him and I didn't, and I can't believe until I see. And do you want to know what's ironic is we labeled doubting Thomas, but those other 10 disciples were locked in that room for an entire week in between the appearances of Jesus because they were scared. So maybe Thomas wasn't the only one who was struggling to believe and to know what to do with their faith. They were still scared and locked in the upper room when Jesus came back. So Thomas could have kept his fears and anxieties to himself, and he could have struggled to believe all by himself. But instead he voiced his concern with everybody and said, no, this is my concern. This is my question. So he asked the question that everybody else probably should have been asking too. Sometimes we need to do that in bodies of communities of faith. We need to ask questions together. Not because all of us will have answers, but because somebody else might be struggling with the same question. And then you could struggle together. And even if you don't have the answer, it's easier because you know somebody else who's having the same difficulty. One last thought. Find a way to laugh. Because there is great power in sharing that moment. Usually when we laugh, it's because there is a truth that has surprised us. That's what most